The instructor's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "You think you can still shoot, old man? Here, try this one." He tossed a rifle toward the elderly veteran standing at the end of the shooting line, a weapon clearly damaged, the scope visibly misaligned. The other recruits, young men barely out of their teens, snickered as they watched the white-haired man in the worn red jacket catch it awkwardly. One of them muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "They're letting anyone join these days, even grandpas who probably can't see straight." The veteran said nothing, his sad, serious eyes fixed on the rifle in his weathered hands. He ran his fingers along the broken sight, feeling the damage, understanding immediately what they'd done. The instructor crossed his arms, a smirk playing at his lips. "Targets at 300 yards. You've got one shot. Show us what you've got, Grandpa." The man they called just another old-timer trying to relive his glory days had arrived at the civilian marksmanship training program 3 weeks earlier. Nobody knew his name, nobody asked. He wore the same red jacket every day over a plain white shirt, his white beard neatly trimmed, his expression perpetually somber. He never spoke unless spoken to, never complained, never boasted. While the younger recruits bragged about their video game skills and their plans to join elite units, he simply listened, cleaned his assigned equipment, and followed instructions. The program was designed for aspiring law enforcement and military candidates, a prestigious course run by former special operations personnel. At 70 years old, he was an anomaly, someone the staff assumed was there on some kind of veterans outreach program, a charity case they had to tolerate. The head instructor, Marcus Webb, a former Army Ranger in his 40s, had made his disdain clear from day one. "This isn't a retirement home," he'd announced when the old man first appeared. "You keep up or you're out." The veteran had simply nodded, that same serious, sad expression never changing. During the first week's physical training, the younger recruits had lapped him on runs. During weapons familiarization, they'd assembled their rifles faster. During tactical drills, they'd moved with the speed and arrogance of youth. And through it all, the old man had simply endured, never asking for special treatment, never making excuses, his quiet presence almost invisible among the boisterous energy of the younger candidates. But today was qualification day, the moment that would determine who advanced to the next phase of training. The shooting range stretched out before them, targets positioned at varying distances, conditions deliberately challenging. A crosswind whipped across the field, and the morning sun created difficult glare conditions. Each candidate would take 5 shots at 5 different targets, scores tallied, rankings determined. The best shooters would earn recommendations, potentially fast-tracking their careers. The worst would be dismissed. Marcus Webb had saved the old veteran for last, had deliberately given him the damaged rifle, the one with the broken scope that had been set aside for disposal. "Let's see what the old-timer can do," he'd said to his assistant instructor, both men grinning. The veteran stepped up to the firing line, the damaged rifle heavy in his hands. The other candidates had finished their qualifications, most scoring respectably, a few exceptionally well. They stood behind the firing line now, watching, some genuinely curious, others openly mocking. "He's going to embarrass himself," one whispered. "Can't believe they're wasting our time with this." The veteran chambered around, the mechanical sound crisp in the morning air. He didn't bother looking through the broken scope. Instead, he studied the rifle itself, felt its weight, tested the trigger pull, examined the barrel alignment with his fingers. His movements were methodical, unhurried, the actions of someone who understood the weapon not as a tool, but as an extension of his own body. Marcus Webb called out the first target. 300 yards, center mass. You've got 30 seconds. The wind gusted, flags along the range snapping violently. The other candidates had struggled with this distance, the wind pushing their shots left. Several had missed entirely. The veteran raised the rifle, ignored the useless scope completely, and sighted down the barrel itself, using the iron sights most modern shooters had forgotten existed. His breathing slowed, his body became perfectly still despite his age, despite the cold morning air, despite the weight of decades. The rifle cracked once, the report echoing across the range. Downrange, the target monitor blinked. Perfect center mass. Bullseye. The laughter stopped. Marcus Webb's smirk faded. "Lucky shot," he muttered, but his voice carried less certainty. He called the next target 400 yards, a smaller silhouette, the wind even stronger now. The veteran adjusted his stance minutely, compensated for wind drift using calculations that seemed to happen instinctively, and fired. Another bullseye. Then the third target, 500 yards, partially obscured by morning haze. The shot rang out, and again, perfect impact. The candidates behind the line had gone completely silent, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion to something approaching awe. The fourth target, 600 yards, required not just accuracy, but an understanding of ballistics that took most shooters years to develop. The bullet flew true, striking dead center. One shot remained. Marcus Webb's face had drained of color, his jaw tight. His assistant instructor stood frozen, staring at the target monitors in disbelief. The veteran lowered the rifle for a moment, his sad eyes scanning the range, and for just an instant, something flickered in his expression, a memory, perhaps, of other ranges, other targets, other times when his life and the lives of others had depended on exactly this skill. He raised the damaged rifle one final time. The last target sat at 700 yards, the maximum distance, a shot that even with perfect equipment challenged the best marksman. With broken sights, in these wind conditions, it should have been impossible. The veteran's finger found the trigger. He exhaled slowly, completely, emptying his lungs. The world seemed to pause. Then he fired. 700 yards away, the target monitor registered the impact. Perfect bullseye, 5 shots, 5 perfect hits with a weapon that shouldn't have been capable of accuracy at any distance. The silence on the range was absolute. Then, slowly, one of the younger candidates began to clap, then another, until applause rippled through the group. But Marcus Webb wasn't clapping. He was staring at the old man as if seeing him for the first time, as if the red jacket and white beard had suddenly become transparent, revealing something he'd been too blind to notice. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The veteran simply began to field, strip the damaged rifle, his movements practiced, efficient. "Just someone who learned to shoot a long time ago," he said quietly. But Marcus Webb's assistant instructor, a former Marine named Rodriguez, had pulled out his phone, was frantically typing something. His face went pale as he read whatever appeared on his screen. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Sir, you need to see this." He turned the phone toward Webb, and whatever was displayed there made the head instructor's expression transform completely. He looked at the phone, then at the old veteran, then back at the phone, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Rodriguez stepped forward, came to rigid attention, and saluted. "Sir," he said, his voice now filled with respect and something close to reverence. "I apologize, sir. We didn't know." The veteran looked up from the disassembled rifle, that sad, serious expression unchanged. "Didn't know what?" he asked softly. Marcus Webb found his voice, though it came out strained. "You're Thomas Garrett, Master Sergeant Thomas Garrett, retired." The name hung in the air, and several of the younger candidates gasped. Even they, young as they were, knew that name. Rodriguez continued, his voice steady now, formal. 147 confirmed kills, 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 in Iraq, recipient of the Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor Device, and 2 Purple Hearts. Spent 8 years as a sniper instructor at Fort Benning, trained some of the best marksmen in the military. You're in the Ranger Hall of Fame, sir. You're a legend. Thomas Garrett carefully laid down the rifle parts, his weathered hands moving with the same quiet efficiency they'd shown throughout. "That was a long time ago," he said, his voice carrying the weight of those decades, of those tours, of those 147 lives taken through a scope. "I'm just an old man now, trying to stay sharp, trying to remember what it felt like to be useful." Marcus Webb stepped forward, and he too came to attention, saluted with precision that spoke of genuine respect rather than mere protocol. "Sir, I owe you an apology. We all do. I saw an old man in a worn jacket and I made assumptions. I disrespected you, gave you damaged equipment as a joke, treated you like you didn't belong here. I was wrong, sir. Completely wrong." The other candidates had gathered closer now, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. One of them, barely 20 years old, asked, "Sir, how did you make those shots without a scope? How did you compensate for wind, for distance, with just iron sights. Thomas Garrett's sad eyes met the young man's eager ones. "Because I had to," he said simply. In the field, equipment fails. Scopes break, electronics malfunction, conditions are never perfect. You learn to shoot with what you have, to read the wind by feel, to judge distance by instinct. You learn because lives depend on it, because your brothers depend on it, because anything less than perfect means someone doesn't come home. He stood slowly, his age evident in the careful way he moved, but his bearing now seemed different somehow, as if the recognition had allowed him to stand a little straighter, to carry himself with the dignity he'd earned but never demanded. "I came here," he continued, "because I wanted to see if I still had it, if the skills were still there, if the old muscle memory remained. Not for glory, not to prove anything, just to know. And also," he paused, his expression softening slightly, "to learn what you young people are being taught now, to see if the fundamentals are still being respected, or if everyone's become too dependent on technology, on perfect conditions, on equipment that won't fail them when it matters most." Marcus Webb's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke again. "Sir, you've taught us more in these 5 shots than we could have learned in months of standard instruction. The way you assessed the weapon, adapted to its limitations, used skills most modern shooters have forgotten. Would you, sir? Would you consider staying on as an instructor, not as a student, but as a teacher? These candidates, these young people who will serve and protect, they need to learn what you know. They need to understand that it's not about the equipment, it's about the shooter. They need to learn from someone who's been there, who's done it when it actually mattered." Thomas Garrett looked at the assembled candidates, at their young faces now showing respect instead of dismissal, at their eager expressions, at their willingness to learn. He thought about the decades since he'd retired, about the quiet years, about the loneliness of being a man whose skills were no longer needed, whose experience was considered outdated, whose presence was tolerated rather than valued. He thought about those 147 shots, each one taken to protect his brothers, each one a weight he still carried. And he thought about the possibility of passing on what he knew, of ensuring that the next generation understood not just how to shoot, but why it mattered, how to maintain their humanity while doing something so terrible, how to carry the weight with dignity. "I'll stay," he said quietly, "on one condition. You treat every person who walks through that gate with respect, regardless of age, regardless of appearance, regardless of your assumptions about what they can or cannot do. You evaluate them on their performance, on their character, on their dedication, not on how they look, not on whether they fit your image of what a warrior should be. Because the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate, and the greatest ally is the one you almost overlooked." Marcus Webb nodded, extended his hand. "You have my word, sir, and thank you. For your service, for your patience with us, and for this lesson. We won't forget it." The candidates gathered around Thomas Garrett then, asking questions, seeking advice, looking at him now with the respect his experience deserved. Rodriguez retrieved the damaged rifle, examined it with new understanding. "Sir," he said, "I'm having this rifle mounted in our training facility, with a plaque explaining what you did today, explaining that skill and experience matter more than perfect equipment, that a true marksman adapts and overcomes, if that's acceptable to you, sir." Thomas Garrett nodded, that sad, serious expression finally softening into something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "That's acceptable, Sergeant. Just make sure the story includes the part about respecting people regardless of their appearance. That's the real lesson here." As the morning sun climbed higher, burning away the haze, Thomas Garrett began his first informal class right there on the range. He taught them about reading wind without instruments, about judging distance without rangefinders, about maintaining calm under pressure, about the responsibility that comes with the power to take life from a distance. The young candidates listened with an intensity they'd never shown before, understanding that they were learning from someone who had walked the path they hoped to follow, who had proven himself when it mattered most, who carried the weight of his choices with quiet dignity. And Thomas Garrett, the old man in the red jacket they dismissed as past his prime, felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt useful again, valued again, respected for what he knew rather than dismissed for what he looked like. The damaged rifle would indeed be mounted in the training facility, and beneath it a plaque would read, "Master Sergeant Thomas Garrett, 5 perfect shots at distances up to 700 yards with broken sights, proving that skill transcends equipment and experience deserves respect. Never judge a warrior by his age or appearance. Judge him by what he can do when it matters most. And every candidate who passed through that program would hear the story, would learn the lesson, would understand that respect must be earned but also freely given, that assumptions blind us to truth, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most capable. Thomas Garrett would spend the next 5 years as a senior instructor, shaping a generation of marksmen who understood not just the technical skills but the deeper wisdom that only experience and humility can teach. And he would do it all while wearing that same red jacket, his white beard and serious expression unchanged, a living reminder that worth is not measured by youth or appearance, but by character, skill, and the quiet dignity of a life lived in service to something greater than oneself.